All right, today's review lesson is on factoring, which we did spend a lot of time on. So we're just going to go through this quick review. Remember, factoring is the opposite of multiplying your polynomials. So basically, you're going to be unmultiplying. And if you remember from yesterday, one of the ways we multiplied was to distribute. So the easiest form of factoring is to factor out your GCF, which is the same thing as undistributing, or taking out that number or letter that each group has in common. So when you take a look at each of your groups, what you're looking for here is which term, what number or letter the groups both have in common. So you can see in my example, I have 12a and 28, and both of those have a 4 in them. 12 and 28 have a 4. Notice the first group has an A, the second group does not, so A is not part of your greatest common factor. So that makes 4 your greatest common factor. That goes in the front. And then inside the parentheses, you're basically writing what you would need to get back to the original problem. So if I started with 4, 4 times what makes 12a, so that makes 3a, and then 4 times what makes negative 28, that makes negative 7. So that's greatest common factor. And if you remember, we are going to take our greatest common factor out at the beginning of every single problem. So you should always be checking for a greatest common factor in your problems if you are going to be doing any kind of factoring problem. So then after greatest common factor, the next kind of factoring we talked about was just regular factoring, where you are thinking about what two numbers multiplied to the end number, and they also added or subtracted to the middle number. And you had to go through and find what two numbers would multiply. So you needed to know your multiplication facts and make sure you had all of those together. One of the other things you guys usually or liked to remind yourselves of when we did factoring was the whole idea about the signs. So just a reminder, if your end number, that's the last number, is positive, that means your factors have to have the same sign, so both negative or both positive. And the middle sign tells you whether you should have positive or negative. So for example, if I had x squared minus 5x plus 6, that means that both of my signs should be the same because it was plus 6, and they both should be minus signs because it was negative 5 in the middle. So then I thought, what two numbers makes makes 6, and that's 3 times 2. 3 plus 2 makes 5, so it's x minus 3, x minus 2. Then we also talked about what if the end number is negative. So if that last number is negative, that means you have to have two different signs, so 1 plus, 1 minus, and the middle number goes with your bigger factor number. So again, if I have x squared minus 5x, this time minus 6, I'm going to use 3 and 2 again, but they have to be different signs, so 1 minus, 1 plus, and the minus sign that I got with my negative 5 goes with my bigger number, which would be 3. So there's a little bit of review on that whole sign part for you too. So that was for easy problems. Notice they have a 1 in front of the x squared term, either after you factored out the greatest common factor or at the beginning. So if there's a 1 here, then you know that that's just the regular easy kind of factoring. Then we talked about what if they don't have a 1 in front, and that's when we talked about slide and divide. So here's a couple of videos to remind you how to slide and divide if you need to see some of those worked out in addition to this video. And here's your kind of quick rundown. So if you have any number in front of your x squared, you're going to slide that down to the end and multiply them. That gives you a new number at the end. You go through and factor that like you normally would with your new number. And then when you've factored, you're going to go back and undo the sliding by dividing by that first number again. So then I also wrote the steps out in a different way if that makes sense to you over here. Whichever version makes sense, they're the same steps. Oops, sorry. So we're going to slide the first number to the end and multiply, factor like we did before, two numbers that multiply and add to the middle, and then we're going to go through and divide. Don't forget, a lot of you forgot that divide part when we were doing slide and divide. So you did the slide part and you factored, but then you forgot to divide, so don't forget to divide. Okay? Remember, when you're dividing, if it makes a whole number, then you should divide those two numbers. If it doesn't, then you're just going to move that denominator up to the front. So let's take a look at a slide and divide example. So here we go. First, we're going to check to make sure we don't have a GCF. So in our problem, 6x squared plus 17x plus 11, none of those have the same number in them, so that's not going to be a GCF. So we're going to go through and slide our 6 down. 6 times 11 is 66. So my new trinomial is x squared plus 17x plus 66. And then I got to figure out, okay, what two numbers multiply to 66 and add to 17? Well, we're in luck. It's 6 times 11 because that's what we just used. So we're going to factor that into x plus 11, x plus 6. Remember, you can put them in the other order if you want. And now that we did our slide and factor, we need to do our dividing part. So we need to go through and do 11 divided by 6 and 6 divided by 6. 6 divides by 6 evenly, so that becomes 1. And 11 does not divide by 6, so we're going to move that into the denominator. So you can see down here in the bottom part, they move the 6 up in front from underneath the 11, and 6 divided by 6 makes 1. So my total answer here is 6x plus 11 times x plus 1. So you can go through and work on some of the practice if you want before you work on your Math Excel, and check your answers at the bottom. And that way, if you have questions and whatnot, you can kind of ask those questions as we go through. But we're going to do greatest common factor, regular factoring, and slide and divide.